So welcome back to Tara Institute for the Monday class. My name's Damien, and for some reason we've got a whole pocket of people sitting over on this side, the safe corner. Anyway, I'll try my best to engage, particularly with the people on that side. So thanks for coming out tonight. It's suddenly turned a bit funny out there with the rain. So let's first just work on our motivation. And, irrespective of whatever turmoil we have in our mind, all the rest of the day, or, whatever resentments or anger, jealousy that we carry during the day, we make an effort to put that all aside and to create within us the highest possible motivation that we can. So essentially the wish to benefit others, but in conjunction with that wish to benefit others, it's some aspiration to improve yourself, so ultimately the idea of a bodhicitta, what's called a bodhicitta motivation, which is the joining of the wish to benefit others with the recognition that as an ordinary person I am very limited in my ability to benefit others, and so creating an aspiration to become fully developed. So for the purpose of benefiting others. So in developing that motivation, put aside all your distractions and any sort of prejudice or disturbance in your mind. So we can just displace that with this motivation to benefit others. So I've been talking about the general topic of thought transformation, and as I mentioned last week, even the mere identification of this as thought transformation is already indicating that our life experience is primarily dictated by our thought and our experience. And so this is something to really think about, that particularly in our circumstances here in Australia, we, as Geshe Doga often points out, he said, it'd be extremely rare for somebody in Australia to die from starvation. It's just not it's almost like not a possibility in this country. Whereas in many places around the world that is an experience for people. And the general peacefulness, facilities, infrastructure, all of these things are very conducive to us having a good life experience. So it's very hard for us particularly to blame the external conditions as being insufficient. You know, if we look objectively, we can see that we do not actually have much to complain about. Even if we do complain a lot, in reality we don't have a lot to complain about. So again, it just indicates to us that our unhappiness, our dissatisfaction, is predominantly generated by my thinking, you know, by my attitudes and by my thinking and by my experience, you know, rather than particularly external circumstances. So thought transformation is, you know, indicates that for the transformation of my experience from suffering to happiness, you know, for that transformation to take place from unsatisfactoriness to contentment or to happiness, for that transformation to take place, it's within my own thought that work will be done. You know, it's within my own thinking and my attitudes and my approach to life where that transformation can take place. Even though we try, you know, the thing is, everybody is looking for happiness, and so you could probably say that the vast majority of people are looking for happiness in better food, better relationships, better clothing, better circumstances, you know, fame, respect, friends, you know, position, praise. You know, that's generally what people are looking for happiness from. And so, to some degree, you know, let's say, for instance, in physical possessions or money or something like that, it doesn't take much analysis to see that it doesn't matter how much money you've got. There are examples of people with huge amounts of money who are striving day and night to have more money, because the amount of money that they have is not sufficient to satisfy their aspiration for money. And so, you know, we can see that, and it's sort of quite clear that once that the pathway there is not a fruitful pathway, even though a lot of people are really engaged in that being a large focus of their life on money. Anyway, it's a simple example, and we can easily convince ourselves of that. Similarly with attachment to any clothing, housing, partners, perversion, or whatever. You know, we can easily examine and verify for ourselves that they are fairly fruitless, but also there's no truth in them being a proven source of happiness. You know, so my point is that to convince yourself that the actual real transformation opportunity that we have is within our mind, not so much in the external. And so I was thinking about this today, particularly in regard to the point about the focus of my life, And if we made a distinction between, what Buddhism refers to as the meaningless affairs of this life, something that is constrained within the scope of this lifespan. So if we start to think there's activities that are constrained within this lifespan, and there are some activities that are beyond this lifespan. Okay? So, this is something all major religions agree that there is some future destiny. There is some future destiny, and that future destiny is fashioned by our actions. Okay? So Buddhism also completely agrees with that there is a future destiny, and we don't have to talk about, if you're talking about all religions together, we don't have to particularly talk about what form it takes, or whether it's permanent, or whether it's impermanent, or whether it's, a repetition or whatever. We can just say there's a future destiny, and that future destiny is fashioned by my actions, maybe by some of my actions, maybe not all of my actions. So if we make a distinction between the activities and the actions and the thinking and the contemplations, the engagements, the obsessions, if we put them into two baskets, one basket which is totally this life, the affairs of this life, and then another basket where the consequences or the power of those actions becomes something that affects our future destiny, right? Either positively or negatively. So the reality is most of the effort that we do in life is entirely sort of constrained by what the texts refer to as the meaningless affairs of this life, building a better house, obtaining fame and respect in the workplace, or creating patents, or building towers, building bridges, knocking them down, flying fighter planes, bombing people, or whatever. Most of these activities, the activity itself, we can say, is constrained just within this meaningless affairs of this life, So many things that we do, And it's worthwhile sort of examining, everything that we do, as to how does that, does it fit into something that is just constrained to this life? Or is it something that will affect our future destiny, either in a positive or a negative way? So, for instance, generating a good motivation. If we generate a very strong motivation, like particularly this bodhicitta motivation, part of that motivation is for it to be unconstrained by this life, so that we aspire to, for instance, benefiting others for as long as it takes to eliminate their suffering, independent of any constraint of just this life. So all of those little actions that we do in life, they can be transformed, that cooking a meal for somebody, taking somebody out to dinner. If you take somebody out to dinner or something, you might have that mental constraint that it's merely to get something from them, to manipulate them in some way, that there's some return for yourself, or it might be just to thank them for having given you something or whatever, but something that's very constrained. But the scope of thought transformation is that we can make any action something that transcends the constraint of just this life by our attitude. So even an example of buying somebody dinner or whatever, if you have a thought, and this falls into a big part of thought transformation practice, that it becomes symbolic. An action like that can be symbolic. You buy somebody dinner and you think, may this person never ever lack for food. May by me buying this person dinner, may this person never ever lack for food in the future. And similarly, may all living beings never ever suffer from starvation or from wanting food but not having food. So this sort of creative changing of our attitudes can actually become something that pervades all of our daily life. And particularly like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, this waking up in the morning with, before you get out of bed, having a thought, today I will benefit others. May every action today be something that benefits others. And so even the most trivial, what we generally view as being a trivial action, picking up a bit of rubbish in the street, opening the door for somebody, buying somebody lunch, stopping at a stop sign and letting the traffic go through, letting somebody pass, letting pedestrians cross the road in front of you, having somebody cut you off and you don't respond with anger and aggression. Every single thing can be an action that is conducive to expanding beyond just the mere constraints of this one life. So I think to a large degree that is like the ultimate type of thought transformation, where the awareness and the transformation of your attitudes within even the simplest action is something that becomes expansive and truly transformative of the attitude that you have towards others. So there's actually no limit to the scope of that type of transformation. So the question that I was thinking about today, you think I sit here and this all seems to flow very naturally for me, and the reality is that my own thinking is, after 40 years, I've got all this sort of stuff at my fingertips in a way, but why is it that I'm not able to actualize it? Why is it that I'm not able to really sort of practice that effectively? And so the question here is about, the big stumbling block we have is actually, I think, I was trying to find the words for it today, but it's sort of like respecting this as being a truth, And I was thinking, what are the obstacles? What are the real obstacles to being able to do this? And the primary obstacles are just our habituations to anger, to resentment, to desire and attachment, to pride, to arrogance, to jealousy. It's our habituations. And then those habituations are so ingrained that in our daily life, they just suddenly spring up and take over our expression. They take over my verbal expression, my bodily expression, my facial expression, and they take over my mental expression. So the habituations that's one problem. And then so as I was saying last week, we have to understand the working of the mind in that, the relationship between my mind and the object that I am cognizing with my mind. So the lustful, the lusted for object. So there's the beautiful woman, or whatever, pick of whatever is appropriate for your own inclination, the beautiful object, and then the mind that is focusing on that. And so the object and the mind have this sort of, I'll call it symbiotic. It may not be symbiotic, but I'll call it symbiotic, where the type of mind that I've got, which is, let's say, the lustful, desirous mind, and then the object that is held by that mind, which is the super attractive source of perfect happiness for me, that embellishment, the object being very attractive and satisfying, and if not satisfying, anticipated to be totally satisfying. So the lustful mind has this power to create the object, and the object has the power to generate the mind. So these two things are working together. These two are working together. And the object is unreal because it is embellished and exaggerated by my desirous, lustful mind. And the desirous, lustful mind is deceived by the super attractive appearance of the object. So to understand how these two work together, this conjunction of distorted mind and exaggerated object. So I mentioned last week that in the Buddhist tenet schools, one of the early schools that people study talks about objects being thoroughly established. So the object can be established thoroughly, existing in a way free of embellishment, exaggeration, and free of diminution, like free of being undervalued and free of being overvalued. So this, it's one of the entry tenet schools to sort of understand reality. And I think it's useful in this case that to have a recognition that when I'm feeling like really jealous towards somebody, or I'm feeling resentment towards some circumstance, I'm reading the newspaper and I'm generating some unhappiness and anger and resentment or something, to recognize within myself that that habituation to my anger and resentment, in conjunction with an article or a story or a reality that I have embellished in a certain way because of my habituation. And so I'm generating this emotion or this comprehension. No, so for me, it's a comprehension of reality. That's what I think. I think it's a justifiable, righteous comprehension of reality. But the actual reality is that I am embellishing some object. So if we think about this first tenet school, they're saying that there is a reality that can be thoroughly established, but it's free of any mental embellishment or exaggeration or mental diminution or mental criticism or it's free of exaggeration in either a positive or a negative direction. So, for instance, the mind of prejudice or the mind of, racism, the mind of nationalism, the mind of superiority on those bases says, this person is special because they're of the same race as me. This person is superior to that person because they are of the same race as me, and it is superior to that person. So the idea of the thoroughly established object is to identify the absolute characteristics of the object that can be posited to exist externally. And so in that tenet school, eventually it comes down to just saying that it's like the mere atomic minimalism, the tiniest atomic minimalism, it is that tiniest atomic minimalism which is the only absolute truth. So we can think that's as a useful thing. We can say that everything else is some sort of construction, some sort of construction, embellishment. And I think that approach is quite useful for us to sort of break down our prejudices, racial, national, educational, suburban, whatever prejudices that we have, and use this idea of that the object is something of just atomic aggregation, and that these other characteristics that I am reacting to, that I am actually fabricating them through the habituation of my anger, desire, jealousy, arrogance, competitiveness, that I'm fabricating those embellishments. So thought transformation, then, we can use that approach to try to soften our really strong, if we feel anger very, very strongly, or we feel lust very strongly, or jealousy or pride, arrogance, superiority, I think this approach can help. And even in regard to your own self, that an analysis of your own body or an analysis of your own existence, if we think of existence as being my mind, my body, and I, this sense of I, this sense of I in relation to my mind and my body. And so this little triumvirate of things travels with us all through our life. And so our apprehension of other things are in relation to my body or in relation to my mind, and the I is like a driver or an interpreter of what's happening to my body and what's happening to my mind. So that's something we can talk about in the future, but so everything we can sort of view is in relation to my thinking, my mind, and the experiences of my body. And I really would like to emphasize understanding this relationship between the attitudes in my mind and the way that fabricates the embellishments on something which is, let's say, minimalistically atomic, you know. And similarly, that embellishment justifies and accentuates the righteousness of my attitude and prejudice towards that. So to see that there's like fabrication on both sides of this equation, both in terms of my mind and in terms of my apprehension. So we can, I think thought transformation ultimately is about solving that problem. Now, superficially, not superficially, but we can right away start to tackle our daily experience by thinking of, identifying through introspection. So this quality of introspection, becoming aware of your own mental state, and then making an assessment of it, and based on our experience, making a judgment as to whether it's beneficial or not beneficial. And then if we decide that it is not beneficial, then based on our experience and our knowledge, we can try to identify that and then apply an antidote. So we can look at thought transformation in daily life as being a process of self-awareness, identification, and then, if needed, an application of an antidote. So, for instance, anger is perceiving an object as undesirable, unpleasant. And that unpleasantness is causing me, or will cause me some loss or some unhappiness. And so the mind of anger is saying, go away. It's saying to that object, go away. For the sake of my happiness, go away. So we can approach that problem by thinking, okay, what's the antidote? The antidote to that. Okay, one antidote is to perceive the object as different to the way I have just been perceiving it. So we can think about changing the object, and we can change the object. We can change the object merely by focusing onto a different object. The diversion of our mental attention away from that object removing that object from my mind, the anger will immediately disappear, because the object that I divert it to, if I'm skillful, I'll pick an object that I'm not angry at. So this idea of diversion is to change your focus from the object that is supporting the anger to then putting it to an object that is not supporting the anger. So breathing meditation is an example of that process. By turning your mind to focus on the breath becomes an antidote to anger, because you're changing the object. But we can also change the mind. So the mind is holding the object. The mind is holding the object, and the anger and the resentment in my mind is being supported by the apprehension of this unsatisfactory object. It is supporting the anger and attachment in my mind. So I can tackle the anger and the anger and resentment in my mind by trying to cultivate a mind of patience. So the mind of patience is willingly accepting the unpleasant experience. So the thing with anger is that it's not accepting this unpleasant object. It's riling up against the unpleasant object. So the mind of patience is willingly accepting the presence of this unpleasant object. So your mind is transformed into an acceptance or a non-disturbance. It's transformed into a non-disturbed state of mind, even in the face of this unpleasant object. Whereas anger is a mind which is disturbed in the face of the unpleasant object. So the mind of patience is a mind that is willingly undisturbed in the face of the unpleasant object. So that's transforming your mind. That's one way of transforming your mind. So another way is that we look at this conjunction of our mind and the object. We look at that conjunction, that the mind of anger and the unpleasant object are supporting each other. They are supporting each other. And so instead of the mind of patience is willingly accepting this unpleasantness and not being disturbed by it. So instead of that, we can break this conjunction of the mind and the object by applying, let's say, a mind of love and compassion. So by actively trying to comprehend this object with a mind of love and compassion, we transform both the apprehension of the object and the apprehending mind. So they both become transformed. So we no longer perceive the person as annoying or detrimental to my happiness or threatening or fearsome or whatever it is. We no longer perceive them like that. We now perceive them as worthy of being happy, worthy of being free from suffering. So our apprehension of the object as, for example, being worthy of being free from suffering, in conjunction with the mind which wishes them to be free from suffering, So the mind of compassion is a mind which wishes the person to be free from suffering. So if we can apply the mind of compassion to this circumstance, we do two things. We change the mind, but we also change the apprehension of the object. And the way we're changing the apprehension of the object is we now are trying to view this person as worthy of being free of suffering. And that object is not an object that you can be angry at. It's the mind of anger and an object which you are thinking is really worthy of being free from suffering. That apprehension of the object is not compatible with the mind of anger. And that's also how we can transform thought. So there's a couple of different techniques in that whole process there. And we can talk about them again next week, when we'll do a very brief meditation, and then we can have some discussion. So, if I'm not one for giving homework, but if I was to give homework, I'd be saying to you, in the next week, really, really try to understand this conjunction of the way we apprehend the object and the way my mind, the type of mind that is apprehending the object, to see these two things working together. And if we really understand that, then we can understand, for instance, that the mind of anger and the perception of the object as harmful to me or unpleasant to me, unsatisfactory to me, that if I can transform the object by seeing that it is totally worthy of being free of suffering, and transform my mind into the aspiration that that person becomes free of suffering, that in that environment anger is not possible. So it's something really to try to understand. And I think if you understand that, then you understand that process, then you can easily understand all of the thought transformation type of approach. So can I ask if anybody's here for the very first time tonight? Okay, thanks. Welcome. Two of you. Not just one. Okay, thanks for coming. And so just adopt a good meditational posture, stable, centralized. Bring your mind within yourself. Let all external thoughts disappear. And let all thoughts disappear from your mind. And turn your attention 100% to the coming and going of the breath. In particular, the awareness. Focus just on the awareness of the breath coming and going. just relax your concentration and just acknowledge to yourself what you are actually focused on. You know? To be very honest to yourself about your level of focus. And then we'll just repeat the meditation, again very short, but with a very strong determination to stay 100% on the breath. Just relax your concentration again. So now we'll just do a very brief analytical meditation. So using the discussion tonight about the mind and the object, about this interrelationship between the type of mind that I have and the object that I perceive. So that discussion that we had, or that I mentioned before, that point. So just spend a couple of minutes examining your own experience, either at one incident from recent memory, some incident in your life, and examine if that approach is correct. That the mind that I have and that the object that I perceive, that they are interrelated in this aspect as discussed. So just spend some time examining your own experience of this. And bring your concentration back to the room. So we've got some time for any questions or discussion.
when the object wants to be seen as either desirable or in a longer state. And we've done all that transforming thought patterns, but how do we deal with when it wants to be seen that way?
So the question is about the object wanting to be seen as... So do you mean like in terms of a person wanting to be seen as attractive?
Attractive
or aggressive, yeah, like in your face or something. So let's talk about the attractive aspect. Does it work? Yeah, like if somebody just is from their side, if somebody wants to appear really attractive to you.
Well, I could see him as an Adam.
Sorry? No, well, we don't, but I mean, it's a good question. So there's a lot to be thinking about. So, first of all, let's say somebody is very attracted to you and they want to present themselves as very attractive to you. So, merely from that wish from their side, right, let's say, does it work for you? Sometimes, yeah. So what determines whether it works for you or not works for you is dependent on your mind and your apprehension. So even if somebody is making no effort to appear attractive to you, but you can think they're incredibly attractive, and then somebody else making incredible effort to be attractive to you, and in your mind you think they're not attractive at all.
So it's still dependent on...
So, yeah. So I think that just reinforces the aspect that it comes from your mind, right? And similarly, somebody who's really trying to be aggressive and threatening to you as to whether they appear aggressive and threatening is again dependent on your mind. And the thing that sprung up in my mind is, down in Gippsland in the forest, there's it's quite rare, this funny little white yabby that lives in the rainforest down in Gippsland. And I was walking on one of the tracks, and there's this tiny little yabby waving his claw in the air, threatening me. I didn't even see him at first, So from his side, he's waving his claw in the air, snaps, trying to threaten me. And I'm there thinking, what? So whether it's attractiveness or aggression or the threatening, in both cases, independent of the mind of the other person, your own mind will determine, And I think we can examine these things in every circumstance, so. And yes. So which part of it are you challenging? Which aspect are you challenging?
I'm just curious.
Well,
because I say that they're talking about inconsequential actions as if they don't matter too much to anything, but they do because you're sitting on a cushion or something, right?
mm,
So that's not the man who made the cushion. That's not an inconsequential action.
mm.
Or the building we're sitting in now is not an inconsequential action. It's hard to know what.
So, inconsequential, do you mean about, I'm talking about, so the meaningless affairs of this life, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, the meaningless affairs of this life. Let's say there's 5,000 pieces of coloured glass in that stained glass window. How relevant is that to you? But somebody's gone to an awful lot of trouble. Every single piece chosen and painted and manipulated. And what value has it got? Sorry?
I think you attach a value when there's like a connection. So perhaps for these, someone else knew someone was important to them, that you like LED light design, or it brought back a special memory, then they might have a greater appreciation.
Yeah. And what, just sorry to interrupt you, but what you say is the critical point, that you have to make a mental connection to that for it to give it value. You know, and that's one of the aspects here, is that independently, like in terms of this thoroughly established object, the thoroughly established object itself, we can say, has no value positively or negatively other than what I give it by my mind. You know, so when we talk about the meaningless affairs of this life, if I project some highly developed value on something, the question that I'm talking about is that something that's just merely constrained by this lifetime of my experience, or is it something of value beyond this lifetime? So if I say, the Victorian buildings all through Melbourne are so beautiful, I have to fight for their preservation, this and that, worthwhile. I'm not saying it's not worthwhile, but like if in this picture of constrained just by the meaningless affairs of this life, or something that can go beyond the value of this life, what bucket does it land in? But a person may endeavour to preserve and enhance the environment for the benefit of all living beings, as a support for their complete freedom from suffering. That's also a possible attitude to have, and that also comes from the mind. So this is part of the point that I'm trying to get across, is if we start to look for an inherent value in something, it's not there, but there is a functional value that we can transform through thought transformation into something that is beneficial. If we can transform our thinking in a skillful manner, we can transform our the meaningless affairs of this life into something more unconstrained. And to think about how we do that. Oh, come on, Paul. Idle gossip, yeah. Look, I used to, when I drive to work, because I worked over an hour away, in the mornings I'd listen to 774, and then in the evening I'd listen to Radio National. And so I was very well informed. And every day I was well informed. And then COVID came, and since COVID I resolved I'm not turning the radio on. So now I'm not well informed by those channels, but unfortunately on my phone I'm just bombarded with things, you know, and now AI things. So I'm not only am I overly well informed, but I'm overly well deceived by everything. So, but you know, like, you know, I think the Lamas are a good example. You know, like Geshe Doga, will never watch a movie. You know, a fabricated story, he's just not interested. But documentaries he's very interested in. Cricket, football, you know, real life experience, he watches, you know. Like, because it's real people doing their real thing. But a movie is a fabrication of things, and it, you know, it just sort of, you know, just not interested somehow. Anyway, that's an aside. But, you know, the obsession that we have with being really well informed, you know, I thought I was really well informed for many years, and then I've stopped being really well informed, and I'm no worse off. You know, like, well, I believe but there may be an element of, you know, yeah, the actual my life experience is actually highly constrained just by what I see in, you know, my immediate environment. There's no particular need to be scoping the whole world for suffering, you know, like that's a truth that's everywhere. You know, like it's interesting now. Well, these days it is, you know, there's a shooting in Missouri or something and somebody got shot. Okay, why am I being told about that here, you know, like... Anyway, no, that's not maybe a good example, but it's just, if you actually look at the news as to what... and it's not just the news, it's just everything that is being communicated at us, you think, what is the filter that produced this presentation? You know, you know, we can now talk about it being an algorithm, you know, but even before the days of algorithms being used to present me with stuff, just what is it that determines that? Like it's just somebody's thought that I will be interested in it, or something that they want to try to change my thinking or whatever. You know, it's just this whole, and I think to a large degree we're better off without any of it. But I still find that 20 minutes flies by in an instant with this sort of barrage of rubbish on my... And I can't stop. I don't know if anybody's got any tips as to how I can stop doing that. It's getting worse. AI has made it worse, no question.
It's constructed the whole. I had an example where someone took a picture, or had a picture of me as a baby sitting on my mother's knee. Another friend created this
Video.
of me jumping around and my mother talking to me. She never did that.
Yeah.
Well, she did, but no one was taking a movie.
I know. It's extraordinary. Anyway, they're all things to... So just to really examine this idea of your mind and the object that your mind perceives, you know, that conjunction of those two. So let's just do a meditation to wrap up. So just think that it's very valuable for us to think about these things, to meditate together, everybody together, thinking, you know, there's a real benefit in doing this together. And that takes the form of a ball of white light above the crown, and bring that above the crown of your own head and let it dissolve into you, completely filling your body with light. So imagine your body completely filled with light and your mind completely open and clear and free of any negativity. And then turning your mind to think about others. Imagine a whole mass of living beings in front of you, a huge number of living beings. in all of their different circumstances. And imagine then giving this white light, radiating out to all living beings, and bringing them happiness. And with that visualization, to have a thought of accomplishing your motivation. So a sense of accomplishing your wish to benefit others. And that accomplishing being a source of great joy. And then imagine the light dissolving back into you and feeling this a joy in accomplishing this visualization. All right, so thank you very much.